Welcome to Running Hot, Action Network's motorsports betting podcast. I'm your host, Nick Giffen, predictive analyst here at Action Network. And joining me, as always, my co-host, Stephen Young of RotoGrinders, better known as Stevie TPFL. And this week, we're talking bets for the Ally 400 at Nashville here on Running Hot. Last weekend at New Hampshire, Christopher Bell, who probably only had maybe like the third or fourth best car in the dry, ended up winning in the damp conditions after NASCAR rightly waited out a rain delay. And then Stewart-Haas Racing teammates Chase Briscoe and Josh Berry ended up performing very well in the rain. All the Stewart-Haas cars kind of came to life in the rain. They finished second and third. So, Stevie, New Hampshire, definitely an interesting race here with the weather stuff that happened. What were your thoughts on some of the decisions NASCAR made, and if you thought it was a good race?
I mean, I feel like we criticize NASCAR a lot, and I feel like in this one we got to tip our hat to them because, you know, they could have called that race and no one would have thought twice about it. It was pouring, but they saw a clearing after the storm, and they knew they were going to have a couple hours of, daylight, and they're like, hey, this is why we tested with a wet weather tire. It was damp. There wasn't spray. It wasn't unsafe for anybody. I mean, you might ask Kyle Busch, and he might tell you differently because what happened with him. But we don't know if Kyle, because he wrecked right before the caution for the rain came out. So we don't know if something necessarily broke on that car or not. And then he got up to speed again, and who knows. But either way, I think it's a kudos to NASCAR moment. The racing with the wet tires was phenomenal. It was fun to watch. It was entertaining. The racing before the wet weather tires was good. I mean, it was a good New Hampshire race. I don't really have anything bad to say. If you had a fast car, you could pass. The tire that Goodyear brought to New Hampshire seemed to be one of the best tires we've seen at New Hampshire in a while. So just all around kudos. Kudos to Goodyear, kudos to NASCAR. I think they made the right choices with non-competitive pit stops there at the end of the race because we haven't practiced a lot of fast pit stops in the rain. We don't need, pit members getting hit by a car because they're slipping on pit road and stuff. So I think all around kudos. That's where I'm at with New Hampshire.
Yeah, that's exactly what I said earlier this week. Kudos to NASCAR. I think they nailed it. I think they nailed, a little bit of hand-holding on the tire decisions as well. We saw Adam Stevens come out and say, that was definitely the right decision, was for NASCAR to dictate what tires we were on for the rest of the race, because otherwise teams will be too aggressive and then it ends up becoming a whole mess, right? We don't have these same runoff areas that we have at road courses and stuff. So I think that was perfectly called race by NASCAR. And so very good New Hampshire race in my opinion. But we're on to a different track this weekend. We are heading to Nashville. Nashville, a bit of an interesting track, probably one of the more unique tracks on the circuit. It is a 1 1/3 mile track in terms of its length. It is concrete, so one of the few concrete tracks on the circuit, along with Dover and Bristol. And then it's banking. It's not steeply banked like some of these intermediates, like your Vegas's, your Texas, even your Kansas's. It's more like 14 degrees, which is a lot lower banking. So it's not quite a flat track, but not really the same banking that we see at some of these intermediate tracks. So definitely a bit of an interesting track here at Nashville using the intermediate package. So we've had 3 races here at Nashville, Stevie, 2 in the next gen era, and then the first one in 2021, which is the last year of the Gen 6 car. Talk about racing at Nashville.
It's different. It's really tough to comp it to anywhere. I know you're going to talk a little bit where your model is at. My model is going to use a lot of 2024 speed, a lot of recent speed stuff. It's unique because it's kind of flat and it's longer than any flat track that we have, but it's not necessarily an intermediate, but it's closer to an intermediate. So, as far as car setup, you're either going to hit it or you're not, I feel like. And, we've seen a few guys with the next gen car, Chevy in particular, like Chastain, Elliott, Larson. These guys have been phenomenal in both next gen cars here at Nashville. So I feel like if you're good here, you're probably going to be good because I feel like it's a different kind of setup than really any other racetrack that we go to. And I know you're going to talk about some of the comp tracks, and some of the comp tracks are like steep bank tracks. So like
Yeah.
it's such a unique place, and I think that's why it's a fun racetrack to have on the schedule, because it's not like a cookie cutter 1.5 where you have a setup from this track and this track and this track. I mean, I think we're going to see a lot of teams come to this racetrack like it's set up like Gateway potentially, and maybe even some data from New Hampshire. But really, like, I think it's really just going to be recent speed, 2024 speed. The intermediate package makes a huge difference because we can kind of go through some of the intermediate tracks that we've had this package with this year. So, racing in Nashville is fun because it's different. And I feel like we need different tracks in NASCAR, and I feel like that's what Nashville brings.
Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned I'll be talking about these comparable tracks. So we've had 3 races at Nashville. So I took data from 2021, 2022, and 2023, and I took each driver's average running position, their green flag speed rank, and their what's the other one? Driver rating, green flag speed rank, and average running position. And then I averaged those, or I should say I correlated those from like Kansas and Charlotte and Gateway and all the different tracks. I correlated those to the same metrics from Nashville and then averaged those correlations. And it turns out Kansas is the number 1 most correlated track to Nashville. I'm going to pull out some really interesting Kansas data here later for you all with my picks. But Kansas, the number 1 comp, it has a correlation coefficient of 0.78. Las Vegas, number 2 at 0.738. And Dover, one of the other concrete tracks, 0.73. So those are the top 3. And then 4 and 5 are Phoenix and Darlington. But when I use just the top 3 instead of just the top 5, I got better predictability when running models. So I'm mostly going to stick with Kansas, Vegas, and Dover as my comparable tracks here. Now, one thing I will say, this tire package that we're running here this weekend at Nashville, we ran at Kansas. We ran at Las Vegas. We also ran at Texas. So I don't think it's impossible to use a little bit of Texas data here. And like you said, there's some similarities to Gateway, 1.25 mile instead of 1.3 mile. Gateway is a little flatter, intermediate package. So I think there's some elements you can pull from some of these other tracks, right? Phoenix kind of similar in banking and 1 mile instead of 1.5 miles. So, in between there. Darlington, drivers that do really well at concrete tracks tend to be a lot of these dirt drivers. And Darlington is another track where a lot of dirt drivers can do well. So I do see some similarities from other tracks as well, but mostly I'm going to rely on Kansas, Vegas, and Dover, as that seems to be what's giving me the highest predictability. And like I said, I'm going to pull out some wild stats from Kansas and how it correlates to Nashville for some of my picks.
Yeah, and for me too, like I will throw Texas in my data. Like when you hear me talk about my picks, I will throw, because it is the same tire, and like it gives us a good starting point. But the 4 tracks for me are the 3 that you mentioned, that the same tire, and then Dover, because it's it's a mile, concrete track, not the same type of racetrack, but it's not. It's very rare to get a mile plus concrete racetrack because of how the concrete kind of wears down. So I use Texas a little bit in my data, but yeah, I mean, overall, I think you nailed it. I love that you bring this kind of stuff and we get to talk about it, and hopefully it helps people when, later in the week when you're trying to bet NASCAR and we're not doing the podcast.
Yeah. So as always, we, when we talk about Nashville, any other intangibles, I definitely have one in mind, but I don't know if you have any other intangibles here for Nashville.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to obviously practice and qualifying going to be important for me this week because, I mean, we have a starting point and we have an idea of where we want to be, but it always seems like there's that 1 or 2 cars that kind of surprise us that have speed, that unload with speed. I always look for cars that unload with speed because that at least gives us an idea of where they're going to be, and you can sometimes take advantage. The books will leave the books open, and you could bet early in practice still and take advantage of that, but I mean, nothing like jumping off the page for me. I will just continue to say that like Chevy has been really, really dominant at Nashville. And even if we're looking at like the correlation tracks that we were talking about, they've won 3 of those 4 races. I think Hamlin won Dover and Larson and Elliott split the other 3 races. So Chevy's going to be good this weekend. We talked about them lacking some like dominating speed. I mean, they could have some dominating speed this weekend.
I love it. I say any other intangibles, and you talk about the manufacturers, because that was my other intangible. Ford has kind of struggled here. Ford has kind of struggled here. We look at 2021, Chevy was super dominant, and Ford did place fourth and fifth. It was the Stewart-Haas cars, which I think is interesting. 2022, the Penske cars were good, but most of the rest of the Ford struggled. And then 2023, the best finishing Ford finished 11th. So not so good. And when I look at my track quality metric, especially just from the next gen era, the top Ford driver, just in terms of track quality, which again is how well do you perform at this track compared to your average track. The top Ford driver that's active, I should say, because Kevin Harvick pops up here, is Ryan Blaney, but he is way down in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10th place in terms of active drivers on track quality. And almost all the Fords have a negative track quality rating. There's only a few that have a positive track quality rating here at New Hampshire from the next gen era. So definitely a bit of a struggle track for Ford historically. So just thought that was one other thing. I do think it opens up the top Ford market and maybe, looking at which Fords were good at Kansas. So that is going to do it for our Nashville preview. It is time to dive into bets for the Ally 400. As always, we're going to take you for a lap around Nashville. I refuse to call it Nashville Super Speedway, just Nashville. That's 4 turns, 1 pick from each of us per turn before we drive into victory lane. So throwing the green flag on the Allied 400, and let's dive into turn 1. Okay, green flag, Stevie, turn 1. What do you got for us?
I'm going to go to a top 10 bet that I talk about, I feel like, way too much, and it's probably cost me way too much money this year. But, hey, I'm going to keep doing it because it keeps making sense. So my model's showing a lot of value here at Bubba Wallace top 10 at plus 220. You got to shop this around. It's plus 125 on some books. So my model's showing value until like plus 170 on this, and I'm getting it at plus 220. You talked about Kansas. Kansas is an excellent racetrack for Bubba Wallace. The Toyotas have been really fast with the intermediate package this season. And Nashville, he's been like right there. Like he's right on the verge of like being a top 10 driver. He ranks 12th in my model just with just Nashville races as far as speed. So he's right on the verge of being a top 10 car. He hasn't had the finishes, but the speed is necessarily like right there. He's finished top 15 in both of the next gen races here. So we're getting a guy that's like a fringe top 10 speed guy that has really good track comp data at plus 220, showing good value on Bubba Wallace here for his top 10.
Yeah, interesting you say he's 12th in your rankings, because I'm going to go with a guy that's just borderline top 10 in my rankings as well, and that's Kyle Busch for a top 10 at plus 210, and I like his top 5 as well at 7-1. So we look at those top 3 tracks that I said were the comp tracks, Kansas, Vegas, and Dover. Kyle Busch was 5th in my flags metric at Kansas, which I use as a true metric of speed. How fast were you really? And then he was 4th in flags at Las Vegas. Remember, he led 18 laps at Las Vegas before he had like a pit road speeding penalty or something like that, got shuffled to the back, and then was just in dirty air after that. And then he finished 4th at Dover. Also, if we happen to look, here at Nashville at his track history, one of the best track quality metrics that I talk about, he's had over 30 fastest laps in each of the 2 next-gen races, and that includes last year when he was with Richard Childress Racing, 33 fastest laps. He's led over 10 laps, double-digit laps in terms of laps led. So he's getting fastest laps. He's running up front. Great at the similar tracks so far this year. So I love Kyle Busch, plus 210 for a top 10 and 7-1 for a top 5.
You got more kahunas than I do. I mean, my Kyle Busch patience is running very, very thin. And for anyone that doesn't know, Kyle Busch is my favorite driver. So I'm a little biased when it comes to Kyle Busch anyway. But I mean, it's been a rough year. You look at the comps. He was fast at Vegas. He was fast at Dover. He had a lot of speed at Kansas. So I understand the pick. It's just you have to put that out of your head of the season that he's having if you're going to bet this, and just take the number. Feel good about the number. The number is good because of all the struggles.
Because of the struggles. I think that's what's opening up a lot of the value, and I'm ready to pounce because when he's actually at this type of track, He's super fast. So I get it. I get being gun shy, but scared money don't make money, as they say. So
I don't know if it's scared money anymore with Kyle Busch.
yeah, I don't know. But I'm not scared to put it in. So let's go Kyle Busch top 10. And Stevie's got Bubba Wallace top 10 as our turn 1 picks. So we'll see what we have once we drive through turn 2. All right, coming out of turn 2 here, Stevie, what's your pick in this turn?
All right, I was tailing your Kyle Busch top 10. You sold me. It's fun. I'm going to go to a top 5 bet here, and I'm going to get a Ross Chastain at plus 150. Now, Chastain has been very hit or miss this season as far as like overall speed on certain racetracks, but the intermediate package has been really good for him. And if we look at Nashville, I mean, he's been a phenomenal car at Nashville. Obviously, with the next gen car, he won this race last year. He finished 5th the year before that. He ranks 2nd in driver rating. He ranks 3rd in speed. So Nashville's been a good track. I feel like it's a track house track. This is a very important city for this team. And like, you got to factor that in a little bit. You know that they're going to take a little bit more time to make sure that these cars are ready for this racetrack because they have a lot of sponsors in this city. So I got Ross Chastain here at a top 5, and I want to bet this before practice and qualifying because Chastain is good at qualifying here. So, I mean, this is a guy that started on the pole here last year. If he qualifies on the pole, we're not going to be able to touch this number for a top 5. I debated on betting his outright, but just I'm going to agree with my model. It's not showing a ton of value with his outright bet. So I took his top 5, even though my model doesn't necessarily love the value. I just think that this is more of I'm going to trust the speed and what we've seen here from Chastain.
Yeah, no, Chastain definitely pops up in my model at the similar tracks this year. If we kind of just average his performance, he comes out around the 6th place driver. So getting plus money for a top 5, I do think makes a lot of sense here. So Ross Chastain top 5 plus 150 is Stevie's turn 2 pick. For my turn 2 pick, I'm going to eat the chalk. I'm going to go Denny Hamlin to win plus 650. And this is where I bring in the Kansas stuff. Now, when I talked about the correlations earlier, the correlation coefficient was 0.78. That doesn't just include the winner. That includes 1 through 36 or 1 through 40 if we've got 40 cars in the race, right? So it includes every driver over all 3 seasons of Nashville. So it's a pretty strong correlation. Denny Hamlin earlier this year was number 1 in flags at Kansas. My flags metric, my metric of true speed, which again encompasses the whole race. Yes, Buescher and Larson almost tied for first place there and probably had 2 of the best cars at the end. I know Hamlin was right there as well. But over the course of the whole race, which is what flags measures, Hamlin was number 1. He was also number 1 in green flag speed. He finished 5th. So if we look at the driver that finished number 1 in flags at the first Kansas race, each of the 3 years at Nashville, 2021, Kyle Larson was number 1 in flags at Kansas, won. He was the winner at Nashville. 2022, Kurt Busch, number 1 in flags at Kansas, won. He finished 2nd at Nashville. 2023, a guy you just talked about, Stevie, Ross Chastain was number 1 in flags at Kansas. He won at Nashville. So the number 1 car in flags has either finished 1st or 2nd, with 2 of those being 1st in all 3 Nashville races. And then Denny Hamlin has great track history. He's led the most laps at Nashville in the next gen car at Kansas. 2nd best average running position behind his teammate Martin Truex Jr. Spoiler alert. And he also won Dover earlier this year, another great comparable track. So when we look at the comparable tracks, when we look at everything, Denny Hamlin plus 650, I'm going to eat the chalk here.
Yeah, I mean, I have no issues. I am patiently waiting to bet outrights this week, and I completely understand why you bet Hamlin now. Because like it's not like Hamlin's going to go to like 12-1, right? Like
right.
You know, at anything he might go to like 5-1, and you might lose out on some value. I'm gonna bet favorites this week. In my mind, I already know like going into the week, I'm gonna bet favorites. I've already bet 1. We're gonna talk about him in victory lane. I might add 2 more. And like Hamlin is definitely on like my short list. So I understand every reason why you want to bet Denny Hamlin this week. It's just personal preference is like, hey, do I just wait or do I just go ahead and do it and then don't add any outrights after practice and qualifying? So I'm just kind of debating on that because it's not going to move before practice and qualifying. If anything, it's going to move after. So I'm just kind of patiently waiting.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. Like you could bet neither of these guys, these favorites here, like a Larson, a Hamlin, or a Truex, or a Ross Chastain. You could bet none of them, and then see which one has the worst, qualifying, because those often will correlate with getting longer odds. But then you lose out on the value on the guys that do qualify well. And Hamlin has qualified first and eighth here at Nashville. So if anything, if he's qualifying first and eighth and he has a good practice, I don't really see him getting much longer. So I think I'm just going to take him now at plus 650. So turn two, Ross Chastain top five plus 150 for Stevie. Denny Hamlin to win plus 60 for me. And we're halfway through the lap at Nashville. We're going to head down the backstretch towards turn three. But before we get there, I want to remind you all, Running Hot is presented by BetMGM. Use bonus code ACTION when signing up to get up to $1,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet does not win. For new users in Arizona, Colorado, Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, New Jersey, North Carolina, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Tennessee, Virginia, West Virginia, and Wyoming. Terms and conditions apply. Must be 21 or older. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Okay, 2 turns down, 2 turns to go. We're going to drive into turn three. Okay, Stevie, turn three. Let's start the back half of the lap off right. Where are you going here?
I'm going to go to my boy, Ty Gibbs, here at minus 105 for a top 10. I really like Gibbs. I was waiting to kind of see where I was going to bet him this week because, I have a ton of interest in Toyota in general, and I feel like he's someone that I want to bet is outright every week, but I'm going to pump the brakes. But if we look at like Vegas, we look at Texas, we look at, Charlotte, Kansas, Dover. This guy, when we're looking at all the comps, is like 6 in speed. He's been faster than Chastain. He's been faster than Elliott. He's really good. He's eventually going to put a whole race together. I just, one of the reasons why I have issues with betting is outright is like he's still young and like it seems like his pit crew just continues to make like silly errors. We'll call them silly errors to cost him like from going from like a third place car to a winning car. So I'm going to bet his top 10 here. My model's showing value here at minus 105. It's moved a lot on a lot of books where, you're paying like minus 130. So this is one I want to jump on now because it's already moving really fast and I want to take advantage of this minus 105 number.
Yeah, I really like this pick. He was fifth in terms of his finish at Las Vegas, was running around that top 5 all day. Finished sixth in both stages at Kansas before encountering problems and finishing 32nd, and a 10th place finish at Dover. So definitely Ty Gibbs has been a top 10 car at the 3 most major comparable tracks. Then you mentioned the other kind of side comps as well, Texas, etc. So I definitely like this pick. For me, with Ty Gibbs as well, his outright, and the driver I'm going to pick here, which is Tyler Reddick, 13-1 for to win the race here. This is just a lean for me right now. So I haven't bet this, just a lean on Tyler Reddick, but I would also lean Ty Gibbs, outright as well. And I think this is a spot where, one of these will shorten probably based off qualifying, hopefully not both. And maybe the one that doesn't, if they look good in practice, I end up betting they're outright because you can get Ty Gibbs at 25-1. You can get Tyler Reddick at 13-1. But for me, Tyler Reddick 13-1 is my lean. He, according to Denny Hamlin on Denny Hamlin's podcast, Actions Detrimental, had the best car last year. And I believe it. Reddick won stage 1 last year, an absolutely dominant car in stage 1. Before encountering issues, he went multiple laps down after getting stuck on pit road. But Tyler Reddick had an amazing car last year at Kansas. We talked about it earlier. Kurt Busch, who drove this number 45 car the year before 2023, so back in 2022, he won at Kansas and then finished second at Nashville. So this car, this team, has a very good track history here at Nashville. And Tyler Reddick, did struggle a little bit at Kansas earlier this year. And so that's the only thing that's really causing me hesitation. He was kind of a back half of the top 10, low teens type of car. He ended up finishing 20th, which was not really the result that he deserved. But at the same time, that's not quite what I want to see from his Kansas speed there. Ty Gibbs was definitely faster at Kansas. So maybe Ty Gibbs 25-1 is the lean as well. But officially for my pick, it is a lean on Tyler Reddick at 13-1.
Yeah, Gibbs, Reddick, We should be a Toyota podcast. Hey, Toyota, you want to sponsor the podcast? Just, throw us some Toyota dollars. But, very interested in Toyota in general. And again, like going back to Kansas, you keep talking about how Kansas comps to this track. And I do not trust you, right? Like we've worked together long enough where I trust everything that comes out of your mouth. And the fact that you're saying that Kansas means a lot to you when you're coming into this race, you have to have interest in 2311. They've been way too good at Kansas not to have interest in them. And then like you get Reddick, who's like a guy that's very good at searching around for grip. We don't know what the resin's going to do this weekend. We're likely going to have multiple grooves because of the resin. We didn't really talk about that much, but Tyler Reddick's going to search around. He's going to find a fast part of the racetrack, and he's going to have a fast race car.
Definitely. And, I do think the interesting thing about those Kansas stats that I mentioned is 3 different teams, right? Larson, 2021, 2311, so Hendrick, and then 2311 with Kurt Busch in 2022. And then last year, Ross Chastain with Trackhouse Racing in 2023. So, right. So it's, even though it's different tracks like Kansas and Nashville, it's always been whoever's fast at Kansas is fast at Nashville. And it doesn't seem to matter which team or which manufacturer it comes from. So those are our turn 3 picks. Stevie with Ty Gibbs top 10 minus 105. I'm leaning Tyler Reddick 13-1 outright. And I would honestly kind of lean Ty Gibbs 25-1 for an outright as well. So 3 turns down. We have 1 more turn left. And of course, that's turn 4. All right, final turn, Stevie. We've been talking about him. You just asked him to sponsor the podcast. What is your turn 4 pick?
Yeah, I'm going to go to the winning manufacturer. I'm going to go to Toyota at plus 140. Do I think Chevy is the manufacturer to beat? I do. I think that they have earned the right to be the favorite, but we're getting Toyota at a good price this week. And when we're looking at the comp tracks, Hamlin, Reddick, Truex, Gibbs, all inside the top 10 in speed, really inside the top 6 in speed at the comps that we have been talking about on the show. And I mean, the wins have definitely come a lot from Chevy. They've won 3 of the 4 main comps that we're looking at this week, but Toyota's had the speed. A couple mistakes and a couple pit stops go differently. Those races go differently. I think Larson's the car to beat. I'm not sitting here saying that he's not, but I think when you look at like 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, like, hey, it's all Toyota, and that's good enough odds for me to have interest in betting Toyota here. So I'm going to take Toyota at plus 140 as the race-winning manufacturer. This is the first time this year I feel like we've gotten this kind of number outside of like a super speedway or road course. We've been getting them at like plus 110, plus 120.
Yeah, I mean, look, we just talked about Denny Hamlin. We just talked about Ty Gibbs. We just talked about Tyler Reddick. We're going to be talking about, we talked about Bubba Wallace. We're going to be talking about another Toyota here in a little bit. So I think Toyota plus 140 makes a lot of sense. That way you capture those leans with Tyler Reddick and Ty Gibbs. You get that Hamlin bet. I definitely think this captures a lot of what we have been talking about in one single bet here. So definitely like that. I think I'm going to tell you on this one, plus 140 Toyota winning manufacturer. For my turn 4 pick, if you follow me in the Action Network app, on Tuesday night, I tracked Ricky Stenhouse Jr. for a top 10 finish at 16-1. It is now 12-1 as the best available out there. So 12-1 is the official running hot pick. But hopefully you got the 16-1 or the 14-1. And he's still 12-1 out there. And there still is a 500-1 to win out there that, yes, I sprinkled and would still recommend sprinkling. Look, we talk about Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and we look at the comparable tracks this year, Vegas, Kansas. I'm going to pull in Texas just from the tire perspective and Dover. And he's had some eye-popping performances at these tracks throughout the years. Now, Dover specifically, which is the other concrete track that we're really, kind of using, he had a second place finish in the next gen car, this JTG car in 2022. At Texas earlier this year, I honestly believe he had a top 5 car. I mean, his speed, his able to pass at will at Texas was, certainly a top 5 car. He just, A, kept getting screwed by his own pit crew, and then B, got trapped a lap down on that weird pit sequence, which caused him to finish 23rd, but he absolutely had a top 5 car at Texas this year. he's had good performances at Vegas and Kansas in the past, top 8, top 10 finishes at both tracks. So yeah, Ricky Stenhouse Jr., why not? And then the icing on the cake, he finished 6th at Nashville in 2021, 16th and 22nd the last 2 years, but it's 12-1, right? We're not saying it's 5-1 or 3-1 or plus 220 like we're taking on a Kyle Busch or a Bubba Wallace type thing. We're getting 12-1 here for a driver that can absolutely finish inside the top 10. And look, he's coming off 2 straight top 10s as well, if we just want to talk recent form at Iowa and New Hampshire. So Ricky Stenhouse Jr., some long shot funsy bets here on his top 10 and even to win.
Yeah, I mean, you sent this to me, was it Tuesday night? Whatever night you sent it to me, like instantly bet it. I'm with you. I didn't even question you or not. I just was instantly in. So yeah, I mean, no issues with this one. I bet it right when you sent it to me. So I didn't even question you. I just opened my app and bet.
Yeah. It's one of those, it's just too long. And I would bet this down even into the high single digits, 7-8-1, somewhere in that range, I think is totally fine. So we'll funsy bet for turn 4, but I do think it has some good value here. So we have now completed a lap around Nashville. Took the checkered flag on the Allied 400. So all we got to do is drive into victory lane. What's our victory lane pick here, Stevie?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to Martin Truex Jr. at 8-1 to win this race. This is, like I said, this is the only outright that I bet so far. If we look at both Nashville races, he ranked first in speed in both races with the next gen car. And you already talked about Kansas and comparable tracks. Yeah, I mean, he hasn't necessarily had the finishes, but man, he's had a fast race car. Both times we're here, he's averaging 45.5 fastest laps in those 2 races, which is more than everybody else in the field. So I expect him to be fast. We know he's been fast. I mean, I absolutely love this.
Yeah, I love it too. 4th in flags at Kansas, behind only Larson and Buescher, who were 2nd and 3rd in the flags, but 1st and 2nd in the race, and that amazing finish. And Denny Hamlin, who was 1st in flags. Very strong, like you said, at Nashville, especially in both next gen races, best average running position. So Martin Truex Jr., I mean, again, looking at things like track quality, for example, stands out. So there's no way that you can avoid Martin Truex Jr. when we talk about Nashville. Checks the boxes. Dover, for example, another really strong track for him in these comparable tracks, and he checks the boxes at the same track here. My Action Network colleague, PJ Walsh, wrote him up at plus 850. Now you can get him at 8-1. So it sounds like we're all on the same page here with Martin Truex Jr. as our victory lane pick. So that is going to do it for us. Thank you for listening to the Ally 400 episode of Running Hot, Action Network's motorsports betting podcast. We'll be back next week as we talk bets for the Grant Park 165 at the Chicago Street Course. So once again, some street course racing. On behalf of my co-host, Stephen Young, thanks again for listening. We'll see you back here next week on Running Hot from Action Network.